Hi, it's Ms. Trevino, and today I'm going over Units 4 and 5 of the 2020 Pre-AP Biology Midterm Study Guide. In the last video, I went over Units 2 and 3, and again today I'm going over Units 4 and 5. So Unit 4 starts with biochemistry, and we have to complete the chart below for the biomolecules. A carbohydrate's function, well, it's the primary source of quick energy. It's also going to help provide structure for a plant. So carbohydrates the primary source of quick energy, and underneath that you could see that lipid is the source of long-term energy storage. Carbohydrates are made of monosaccharides, and examples of carbohydrates can be anything that's a sugar, like your glucose, or your fructose, or your sucrose, or your lactose, basically anything ending in OSE. And it could also be starch. Lipids, again, like I just said, are the long-term energy storage, and they also help make up your cell membranes. The monomers are going to be the glycerol, and fatty acids. Examples of lipids are going to be your fats, your oils, cholesterol, or steroids. Forgot to add the O. Again, it can also be the phospholipids that help make up your cell membrane because those are lipids. The function of a protein, well, its structure. It helps provide structure. It helps provide structure for tissues. It helps transport substances. It helps build muscle. And lastly, it helps with enzymes. Well, they are enzymes. They make up enzymes. And enzymes are going to control the rates of reactions. The monomers of proteins are amino acids. Remember, there are 20 different kinds of amino acids, and they can all be put together in different orders and different ways to make up different functions. Examples of proteins, well, that can be your hair, nails, and muscle tissue. Could also be, again, your amino acids and your enzymes. The function of a nucleic acid is it's going to make up the genetic material. And that genetic material is important because it carries the instructions for the cells in your body and all living organisms. The monomers of nucleic acids are called nucleotides. And those are going to be made up of your 5-carbon sugar, your phosphate group, and your nitrogen base. Examples of nucleic acids are going to be your DNA, RNA, and it's also going to be the energy source of ATP. Number 15, we're going to define the following terms related to enzymes. A substrate, that's the molecule that binds to the enzyme. Remember, it fits kind of like a locking key. A substrate is very specific to that enzyme. And the enzyme's going to help either put it together or break it apart, depending on what that substrate needs to do in the cell. The activation energy is the energy needed, well, the amount of energy needed to start a chemical reaction. And an enzyme is a protein that acts as catalyst to speed up the rates of reactions in the cell and in the body. How does an enzyme speed up that chemical reaction? Well, it does that by lowering the activation energy. So again, the activation energy is the energy needed to start a chemical reaction. Well, if the enzyme lowers that energy that's needed, then it doesn't take as much work to get the job done. So the cell can do it faster and faster because it doesn't need as much energy to do it. Number 17, enzymes are specific to the substrate, just like a lock and key. Again, if they don't fit together, then the enzyme won't work, and it won't work on that substrate. That's why when proteins are denatured, when enzymes are denatured, they have their shape changed so the substrate can no longer bind to it, and it can no longer perform its function. Now we're on Unit 5, Cell Structure and Function. Number 18 says to list the levels of organization from smallest to largest. Well, the cell's going to help make up the tissue, and the tissue is going to make up an organ. Then the organs in your body are going to make up the organ system, and the organ systems in your body are going to help make up the organism, which is you. You are an organism. Now, a bunch of organisms together is called a population. And then the population is going to help make up the community, which is all living things. So your population would be all the humans in the area you live in. The community would be all the living things, so the humans, the insects, the birds, the trees. And then an ecosystem would be all the living and non-living things, so your house, the rocks, the people, the animals, the trees. You could even go further into levels of organization, like biome and then biosphere. Number 19, we're going to match the function of each organelle. Well, the nucleus is the most important. It's the control center of the cell, and it contains the DNA. The ribosome, that's going to make the proteins, which like the enzymes. The mitochondria, well, that's the mighty mitochondria, and it's mighty because it produces the energy for the cell. And the vacuole, that's going to store water and salts for the cell. Remember, plants have very large vacuoles because they like to store a lot of water. Animal cells sometimes have a vacuole, but it's never going to be as large as the plant vacuole. 20. What is the function of a cell membrane? Well, remember, the cell membrane surrounds the entire cell, not just the nucleus, but it surrounds the entire cell. And it does that because it's going to help maintain homeostasis. Meaning it wants to keep everything balanced in the cell. So it's going to do this by regulating what goes in and out of the cell. Again, it's going to surround the entire cell, and it's going to maintain the homeostasis by regulating what goes in and out of the cell. Number 21, explain what projections are glycoproteins on the virus are used for. And those are the little suction cups that are sticking out of the virus. And I'm going to lower that. Never mind. Just make sure you understand that this picture does not go with the cell membrane. This picture goes with number 21. Explain what the projections are. So the projections are going to attach to the host cell receptors. So host cells, like our cells in our body, are bacteria cells. Basically, any living cell, they're going to have some cell receptors embedded in their cell membrane. And the virus is going to use the glycoproteins to attach to those receptors. And it's going to do that so it can fuse with the cell with the host cell's membrane. Once it's fused with the host cell's membrane, then it can start to inject its viral DNA or RNA into the host cell where it can make more copies of itself, and eventually it can burst open the cell, releasing more viruses to do the same things to other cells. Number 22, we're going to fill in the chart below comparing cells and viruses by typing yes or no in the highlighted blanks. So remember, cells can be eukaryotic or prokaryotic, animals or plants or bacteria, also be fungi or fungi or protista. They do have cell membranes. They do have cytoplasm. Eukaryotics also contain a nucleus that surrounds their DNA, but bacteria does not. That's the one thing bacteria has in common with the virus. It doesn't have a nucleus. Viruses have a capsid, which is a protein coat. Some viruses have an envelope that surrounds the capsid, and the envelope may contain the surface proteins, or the glycoproteins, that are going to help bind to the cell to inject its viral DNA or RNA. So remember, in order to be considered living, you need all 8 characteristics of life. Well, one of those characteristics is growth and development. Cells can grow and develop. For example, in our body, we have cells, and they do grow and develop because they help make us go from babies to adults. Viruses, however, cannot grow and develop. Once a virus is made, that's it. It can't develop into anything else. It stays what it is. It doesn't grow into a larger virus. It doesn't develop into an adult form of a virus. Cells can reproduce or replicate. Again, for humans, we reproduce cells all the time. That's why our fingernails keep growing and our hair keeps growing, because we keep pushing out new cells. We replicate, yes, because in order to get new cells, we have to come from an original cell. Viruses, technically, they can reproduce and replicate, but they can't do it by themselves. So that's a no. It needs to have a host cell to get it done. It can't do it on its own. So if a virus was just alone by itself, it would have no way of making more of itself. It would have no way of reproducing or replicating. Cells do have a genetic code. Again, that's your DNA or your RNA. Animal cells like us, we have both. Some bacteria may only contain RNA, but most cells have DNA and RNA. Viruses also have genetic material. They have DNA or they have RNA, and that's what they're going to inject into the host cell to help make more of itself. It's going to copy its genetic code and make more viruses. Cells can change over time. Evolution, for example, our cells evolved. Remember the endosymbiotic theory that said a big bacteria ate 2 little bacterias, and then it evolved into a eukaryotic cell. Well, that's change over time. Viruses can also change over time. Viruses mutate all the time. For example, the flu mutates every year. That's why every year you need to get a different flu shot, because the old flu from last year has already mutated into a new form. So if you're looking at this chart, you can see that cells have all of these characteristics, but viruses only have half of them. Since the virus doesn't have all the characteristics of life, viruses are not considered living. Cells are, but viruses are not considered living. So that's all I wanted to talk about for units 4 and 5. I will make a video over the other units next.